Well, hello. Welcome to RPG with DBJ. Today we continue our uh, demi-daily deep dive into world building in different eras of time. And enough information made me be a little remiss that we did miss a huge theme in modern day. So that is horror. So one half of this, we're going to go through horror and also the big mistakes, right? Because I believe that horror and technologically speaking, the big mistakes are another thing that you can really play with in terms of the modern era. And then we'll go into tomorrow, we'll go into cyberpunk and low Earth orbit. Then we may even go into post-apocalypse and like near future, maybe even with exploring our solar system, basically adventuring in the expanse, I suppose, but not necessarily that specific television series, but just essentially, exploring as if our solar system was settled, exploring Saturn and other places of that nature. Oh, I have a visitor now. You can't see her, but one of my cats is here, and usually if I close a door or block them off, you can really hear them, and they're not very quiet. So usually I just let them patrol around and hang around my legs and stuff. So little further preamble as people find the live broadcast and get into the chat. Two things. One is that myself and Jeremy Lilly from Erasmus Expeditions did a little interview. He kind of interviewed me and we talked about exploration. So please check out Erasmus Expeditions. Of course, I'm subscribed to his channel, so you can look at my subscribers and whatnot. The episode is called Help Action. I believe it's the 5th episode. They're usually about an hour to an hour and 20 minutes long, similar to what I do here. So but yeah, he's got a series called Help Action, and check out the other people that he's interviewed, Megan Hambrick and Jacob Norman and a host of other people. So yeah, Dead Man the Storyteller says we did get a glimpse her a little bit. Yeah, she's my camera is actually parallel to her, so you can't see her, but she may make some noises and stuff. She just wants some attention, as most cats are. They can be pretty arrogant and self-centered. Yeah, I see your ears poking there, kitty. Yeah. All right. Okay. The other thing, a little preamble and a little bit of self-sale is that Alex is the head honcho here at Critical Hit Publishing, is an avid fan of Call of Cthulhu. So we have a release from Call of Cthulhu called The Pipeline, and it takes place in 1986, and it is a kind of a throwback to the past of the exploring into the wilderness, almost I would say parallel to the 80s movie The Thing, although it's not necessarily The Thing, but is a Call of Cthulhu adventure. Over 50 pages, including handouts, maps, and everything like that. I will soon be receiving the hard copy, the print, and then do a PDF page through when I receive it. So take a look out for that. I'll let you guys know ahead of time, just if you're not really into page throughs and reviews and things. And of course, like I said, it's pretty much a self-sale. So if you're just like, I'd rather have somebody else do it, that's fine. But yeah, it's called The Pipeline. There are you can actually search on YouTube for a number of actual plays, some live plays where we were doing some play testing through it. So yeah, kitty, come on, you're making noise. Come on. Yeah, this thing was set in Antarctica. This one is in the Arctic. The northern Alaskan border, as the PCs are there to investigate and basically investigate a pipeline, a problem with a pipeline and a hazards that happen when communications are cut and the weather gets bad, and of course, you know, corporate interests and things like that. Yeah, very much along the lines of like Exxon and all that kind of business, and some a number of things are happening there. Kiwi, what's going on? Okay, so we are going to talk about, and I was remiss that I missed something. Joseph Keenan brought this up, and I was like, man, you know what? You're absolutely right. Really, Kitty? Really? I'm gonna get out of here. Wow. Yep, scratch me up a little bit. You can't really see it. Yeah, you can. All right. So, Vince, what's going on? The idea here is that, and I can't believe that I really glossed over it, I guess, yesterday, but the idea of adventuring in modern day and horror. There are a ton of people who are horror fans and RPG Call of Cthulhu fans, and so I thought I'd like, wow, we can't gloss over that. Yesterday we kind of talked about like agents and superhumans, kind of the people who know about the shadowy things in the corners and take care of that, but we really didn't go into horror itself. So I thought we'd talk about that a little bit today. And of course, the other half will be the big mistakes. And I just, you know, capital B, you know, capital M, big mistakes, meaning like it's the big. I suppose you can categorize it as the beginnings of the beginnings of the apocalypse before it becomes the post-apocalypse. And we've seen a number of mass media things that way, where it's the release of a plague or nuclear weapons, or society goes mad, or the downfall of government, or all of the preppers, you know, micro predictions of how the world will end, and then doing that kind of like it is the apocalypse, but it's not yet quite yet the post-apocalypse. We've seen many movies where the zombie, you know, the zombies go loose, and it's like the beginning of that, which, you know, kind of, it's part of that system too. But I mean, even things like where the weather goes bad, or some kind of new robot, something goes crazy, kind of like the beginnings of the Skynet in the Terminator movies, anything like that. So okay, so let's start with horror. Horror is like, in many ways, it's like playing the role-playing game Dread that uses the Jenga tower. It's not really about survival. It's more or less surviving further than everybody else in the game, right? There's quite a bit of like, we're all going to die at some point or go mad. Let's see how long we last before that happens, and trying to uncover the mystery, or essentially get to the end of the adventure before it happens to you. But it's not really designed. Horror games are not really designed for like you know, player characters to last over and over and over again. Vincent says Call of Cthulhu mostly plays in early 1900s, because in actual modern times horror becomes hard to do because of smartphones and such. Yeah, and I mentioned that yesterday, that with our modern technology, horror has a number of elements that are specific to the horror genre, and that is you know, claustrophobia, the lack of ability to be quite free. Usually, you know, 99% of horror happens in a very enclosed space, and that the enclosure of that space could be a single room, or an elevator shaft, or a cave, or that enclosure could be an amusement park, or an office building, or a space station, or a vacation, you know, home that's been closed off in the woods or something like that, right? Horror is about not having a way to escape the location. And then horror also has the problem of like smartphones. And I did mention it yesterday that there's always this nudge nudge, wink wink, like, well, you don't have a cell phone, you don't have cell phone coverage, and everyone's just like, cell phone coverage is getting pretty good now. I mean, there are very few places that you don't have coverage unless you're like deep underground or out at sea or something like that, right? So there's a lot of limiting your information and your ability to call to call for help. It's basically you're stuck in one location, there's something horrible, and you really don't have the time, energy, or resources to fight against whatever is out there. Excuse me. Hey, hey, what's up, Ricker? Foolish Kiwi says, a bit unorthodox, but from experience, it works. Modern maps, take a Google Earth overhead of a real life city area, put a grid on it, go to Street View, edit a few key buildings to look down on, I guess. Did for a zombie game to make the world very, very feel very real, as it was literally real, and stores, etc., were all in realistic locations. I absolutely agree. Like, you can really, if everyone you're playing with is from a place that you're familiar with, or you're physically at a table and everyone's from the same city, that's a great thing to use. I mean, like you said, drop a grid over it and you're done, essentially. I mean, yeah, you got to modify a couple places here and there. Maybe there's some key locations that you want to exist that may not exist anymore, whether they're stores or restaurants or what have you. But yeah, absolutely. Rickard said, I would say the reason Call of Cthulhu is set in early 20th century is due to the element of that not all things have been explored. That's another thing too. It was in that like early teens, 1920s era, maybe even before that, early 19th century, like 1870s, 80s, Victorian, post-Victorian era. A lot of those stories, the Call of Cthulhu, the Cthulhu-like stories were written at that time, so it makes sense that it would be that way. And there was a big, we did the combined Victorian age, where there was this idea that people didn't know things, but they were very ready to explore the world in their lack of knowledge, as opposed to being afraid of it. And there was a little bit of a like the dangers of exploring too far and not staying home, basically, right? There was a little bit of that involved in there, a little propaganda. It's like, yeah, you can go out exploring if you want to, but you better be careful what you bring back. Vince says you can use modern tech to your advantage, though. Some horrors you don't want to understand. I agree with that. Nanotechnology, genetic engineering is another thing. The fact that we actually don't know much about how radiation works and operates as far as like long-term studies in many things. So there are a number of like movies and books that are about radiation and genetic engineering that has kind of gone wild. The creation of life, or finding, uncovering an ancient plague that's been buried underground or something, just waiting to be released or something. Rickard says Call of Cthulhu in modern time would be urban fantasy horror. Yeah, I agree with that. If you want to go for the mystical, you could have like the urban, like the fantasy portion of it, the release of demons and devils or summoned creatures from other portals or something. If you want to go sci-fi, it would be like robots or basilisk hacks, where people are looking in computer screens and being like hypnotized or something, that kind of thing. Yeah. Foolish Kiwi says, use the phones to scare the players. Maybe they learn the danger can track them if they turn on their phone for long, or use anything that emits signals. There's been I believe there's been a number of those things. The idea that there's a literal ghost in the machine that's tracking you by your phones, following you on the idea that there's something that can track you through audio and video cameras everywhere you go, that there are people following you on your social media and triangulating your locations and stuff. So you could still have something like that in modern day. But again, the problem would be ampant ability to travel to get away from something. So if something is released in a major city like a New York City, if you can get in a car and drive away, it's more like, well, the common sense would say you would want to do that, and having that horror follow you. So you would, you'd have to go the apocalypse, the pre-apocalypse thing where the danger is spreading far enough that you really can't outrun it for long. Ricker says, to build on that, take the radio from Silent Hill. You can't contact the outside world, but it can alert you to nearby horrors. The Quiet Place, something like that, where they were, it's, the world still exists, but you can't make any noise to contact people, which is pretty scary by itself. I like that. Vince says, what if technology isn't as reliable as you think it is? The creator of Cthulhu would not approve to play in current times. He made his stories as realistic as possible. Some even asked if certain universities, about the Necronomicon. Yeah. Hell, I think one of the most recent ones was there was a radio program that involved War of the World, and people believed the radio program when they did the War of the Worlds on the radio. And they talked about the three-legged machines coming from Mars or wherever it maybe came from the ground, and whatever the case may be, they were invading Earth, and people who listened to the radio at the time, television wasn't available, and the way it was done on the radio, people believed it, and they went outside with their guns and looked at like water towers and thought they were aliens invading the Earth and stuff, and they locked their doors, and people were in the streets, scared and everything. So yeah, it's not that you can't do it, that Call of Cthulhu or Call of Cthulhu-ish games can't be done in modern eras. There was a reason that it was done back then as well. Just the stories took place in the past, early 1900s, and there's a lack of technological use for you. You had pistols, you had Morse code, maybe. You had some limited radio signals that might or might not be effective. You had automobiles that weren't quite reliable. You had maybe railroads. You had prop planes that were very rare. So if you do something in modern day, it really has to be something that can overcome modern day uses. Because, the first thing PCs are going to do is just like get automatic weapons. They're going to try to find explosives. They're going to run as far and as fast as they can to places that maybe your evil plan can't reach. And they're going to, do Google searching and go to libraries and pick up as much information about what's going on, hiding themselves in a tank or something like that. They're going to do those things. So it's going to have to be, the horror is going to have to be something that's going to have to spread wider the more information and travel ability the PCs can have. Foolish Kiwi says, a great thing about horror in the modern era is that often the police aren't on your side. Telling them what's happening may get you just put in the crazy house. That is a real thing too, especially if you take a look at some modern movies where there's like ghosts or demons or anything magical. It's just like, yeah, that's not a real thing. Hell, even the movie Terminator, hey, we got to run to the cops, and the Terminator just cannot be stopped, and he's just like, I'll be back, and then starts killing off all the police, and the people, Sarah Connor is running from this thing, but gets caught up in it because she happens to be in the same place, the same location. So that is a great thing. Tales from the Loop, the role-playing game Tales from the Loop, where you play children, is very much based on that, where it specifically says in the rules that adults are aloof and they don't believe you because they're more caught up in their own lifestyle. Like, you can't run to the authorities. You cannot run to your parents to alert them about and get help from them about whatever's going on. You as kids have to solve the problem. And that's a specific theme of that game, right? And so you could really do that where the police and the authorities are just like, I don't believe you. And they're like, no, there's a robot coming after me. And they're just like, whatever, you must be high on something, right? There must be You know, you come down off your opioid high and let's talk. Excuse me. Rickard says, last part about Cthulhu, to quote from Call of Cthulhu, says, the sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little, but someday the piecing together of disassociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. So it's very much a bit of an antithesis to the information society. Yeah, and that was the thing, right? Revealing too much information, that could, even today, that could be a thing, right? Looking too far into the past, looking too far into our cosmos, looking too deep into our oceans, looking down too hard into our, you know, genetic ancestry or something like that. That goes to me, that goes hand in hand in the big mistake idea, where someone is just like, hey, there's plenty of stories about this, right? Like someone's like, I want to do cloning, and everyone's like, we should need to talk about it. And that, you know, the one scientist is like, my family was killed or something, I'm going to clone my family. Or someone died in a car accident, I'm going to save them by downloading their brain into something. And you find out that that there's more horrors involved in unregulated sciences, and even the exploration of magic, right? The idea that there's maybe you know, King Tut's tomb, and we're going to open it up, and everyone's just like, maybe we shouldn't. And someone's like, oh, what's this say on the wall? A curse? Ignore it. Move the stone aside. I'm going to get rich. And then they release something into the world. So it's not that you cannot do it, but you, especially in a session zero with the players, like you can just tell them straight up, like, you're going to be involved in things that the authorities and regular society just will not believe you, right? If you just start out with that rule, like, yeah, I know it doesn't make sense, but in this context, it's up to you guys. No one else is going to believe you in this endeavor. And thanks, Rickard, for that. Like, it is essentially the idea that there's a fear of the unknown, and we should be afraid of the unknown because revealing the unknown might drive us insane if we knew what it was about. Azala says, you should never talk to the police anyway. Every lawyer and ex-cop will tell you that. Okay, we're not going that way. Vince says the true horror would be having a video about like a madness infusing monster going viral. It makes things for those things much easier, right? So it could be a good part of horror is ourselves. It's being driven mad, you know, losing our touch on society itself when society starts to break down. So imagine a literally a meme horror that is like infecting people's minds, and maybe they lose control of their they have low impulse control, right? So if they feel like, hey, I think I can fly, and they start jumping off of buildings, right? The mass suicides, or the mass mind control thing, or something where you never know if you take a look at your phone or televisions and you have to start cutting off. You cannot rely on electronic devices, because as people look at their phones, they too become part of this mass hysteria. That's this, you know, mass mind control that's maybe going after the PCs, which would be that'd be pretty interesting, right? Like to have to never know who you can trust. Yeah, the ring goes digital. I like I like that. I really like that a lot, you know. And the ring actually had a background to it. If you take a look at the movie, the images in the ring were a reflection of the horrors that happened to. I know I'm giving something away. Spoiler alert! That the images in the ring that were exposed in the movie were the background of the young girl, because of how evil she was, and she was put away. So you could have these people living out the horrors of what they've seen, and then finding in the PCs, having to piece together the information to stop it, or maybe they can't stop it. Maybe they have to run out into the woods and rely on like preppers that are out there like, yeah, we knew this would happen. Yeah, we already predicted it, right? Let's see. I guess it's pronounced Nephirite. I'm going to go with Nephirite. Nephirite says, contemporary horror, I think, runs better when the characters are more dispossessed, vulnerable. So yeah, there is tech and resources, but society isn't equal, and not, and as you're saying, not all have access. So basically that the PCs do have some tech and some resources, but society isn't equal to have all that access. Yeah. So thank you. Nephirite. Yeah. So in many ways, right, like the pre-apocalypse, if I can call it that, the pre-apocalypse is like this mad dash to run around and get as much technology and resources as you can before you can't get it anymore. You know, it's the ex-military guy that runs to his house and picks up a floorboard and grabs his his go bag that's got like, a couple of pistols, an automatic weapon, some explosives, his BDUs, you know what I mean? Like it's a couple of those radios with the movie radios with like the big thick antenna, looks like the old cell phones with the antenna that's as long as the phone to let us know as a viewer that this is a secure line or something, right? So the PCs could run around, get those things, which would give them an edge in fighting this horror, but then that's all they have access to. Now the thing about a horror that can spread might be that if the PCs, let's say they run to a military barracks, that if the people there start getting mind controlled or this influence spreads to them, you're literally in one of the most dangerous places in the world, right? They've all got automatic weapons. They've all got, armored vehicles. They all have helicopters and drones and that kind of thing. So that's a possibility. Now, again, I want to talking about horror and the big mistake. A big mistake could be like any of the Tom Clancy style mission stories where one government is completely convinced that another government is going to go after them, and you could have like a terrorist organization that has set up something where they've created the pre-apocalypse already, and the PCs are running around trying to stop it, but no one believes them. And as things get worse, little skirmishes and fights start happening, and battles start happening around them. And then, of course, it's the horror of no one believes us. Like, we're the handful of people that know this shouldn't go that far and such. And Dead Man brings up 24. Yeah, we brought that yesterday. More or less, I'm thinking we're going to move towards. I mean, it is horrible. Don't get me wrong. Like, of course, Jack Bauer's. Jack Bauer-isms are second to Chuck Norris-isms, but yeah, more or less putting the PCs in a extremely vulnerable position. Foolish Kiwi says the worst place to be in the modern age in horror is a city. It doesn't matter if it's one monster or a million. Cars swelling all over the place, panic police responding, military, people looting and taking advantage of said panic, etc. And for me, I love the idea of like the pre-apocalypse, the idea that storms are out of control, or the idea that a plague is spreading through cities and the dead are piling up and people are going crazy. The idea that there's madness spreading around, or like you say, there's a Wendigo creature or a Chupacabra or something like that. I butchered that name, but like there could be some mystical creature that's going crazy, and people are just getting paranoid. And of course, you're going to have black marketeers. You're going to have people who panic. There are going to be people who are going to pull out their gun and steal things from other people, and and the chaos that society makes. For me, I haven't yet seen in an RPG that really embraces the chaos, right? So let's say, okay, let's bring up the idea of the Terminator, right? Not many RPGs talk about like massive car accidents and pileups and power outages and the madness that spreads when people start locking their doors or roaming the streets as self-asserted vigilantes and things like that. Yeah. Rickard says UFO and XCOM and the like could easily be turned into pure horror. Yeah, absolutely. The alien invasion stories, right? Aliens first come to Earth, big giant ships. They start dropping aliens. They start blasting people, and immediately, you've got to make a run for it. And that's like the beginning of like the pre-apocalypse, before things are shut down, before a generation has passed. Yeah, of course, Zala says zombies in the city is always a classic. Hell yeah. And of course, how the zombies are created. Is it a plague? Is it genetic engineering? Is it are they rage zombies, right? Is it an infection that causes them to be enraged, where they're like the 27 days and 27 weeks later movies are like rage zombies more than they haven't died. They're more or less hyper glanded, hyper adrenal zombies. Yeah, Deadman says chupacabra. Okay. Rickard says storms and the like, horrors equals horrors terraforming Earth to their liking. Yeah, it could be an alien species that comes to Earth that tries to terraform it, or maybe the Earth itself. You can always have those oracles that are like, the Earth is going through another ice age, or the storm movies, Twister, The Day After Tomorrow, all of the heat waves and oceans rising and all that kind of stuff that seemed to be happening. What's another movie? 2012, the prediction of the end of the Earth being flooded and that kind of thing. So those are horrors too, because not only would you need to try to find a place to survive, you also need to fight against everyone else who is trying to survive in their own way, and they don't trust you, you don't trust them. Deep Impact, it is another one. An asteroid about to head to Earth, and there was a television show. I can't remember the name of it. Not Savior, not Survival, whatever the case, whatever the television show where an asteroid is about to hit Earth, and spoiler alert, the asteroid was like a starship or something. But anyway, so an asteroid's about to hit Earth, and all of the panic that happens. If we knew we were going to be impacted by something that will wipe out all Earth in the next 80 days or something, right? Panic would ensue. And what happens when everyone knows that that's going to happen? Do you send up nukes? Do you explode it? What happens if it's different chunks? Do you make the asteroid hit another country, hoping that your country won't be impacted? How about having it hit the oceans if you can disrupt it enough to just hit the oceans? Do you send up a crew of space people to try to take a starship, or do you whatever? And on Earth, who gets to survive in the underground bunker? How do you get to the bunker if you live 5,000 miles away? That kind of thing, So, and on and on and on. Foolish Kiwi says that we play XCOM. Oh yeah, he says another one for modern era is the kaiju, focusing on the sheer mass loss and uncaring coldness as it crushes hundreds, not even seeing you as it steps past. Oh, I like, and what is Pacific Rim, right? In a way, that is kind of like a horror theme, even though you're using like giant robots and kaiju, and giant robots is the giant monsters are kaiju, giant robots are Jaegers, and even in that setting, right? I mean, the Jaegers are friggin' destroying cities. When you pick up a cargo ship, almost like the giant oil tanker, and use it as a baseball bat inside an urban setting, you're pretty much destroying cities, right? And even there, people were scared because they were trying to erect these walls to keep the kaiju back, and of course, the kaiju destroyed the walls and stuff. And just by their sheer presence, like what's the next Godzilla movie, you know, it's like just their sheer, even Godzilla as the air quote hero of the stories destroys everything in his path because everyone's just pretty much like ants. So yeah, I think kaiju, the kaiju threat is absolutely part of that. Rickard says, another problem with modern era, how do you make the PCs closer to an everyman to not have an organization behind them, but special enough to be able to go globetrotting and stop the horrors? And yeah, that's the thing, right? Do you like, you would have to very specifically set up a situation where, for example, the television show, The Last Ship, which wasn't bad. I thought the first 2 seasons were pretty good. In the television show The Last Ship, there was a destroyer, you know, fast attack destroyer. Military goes up into the Arctic with some scientists to study something, and then there's radio silence. They get attacked up in the Arctic Circle, and on their way back, they realize that they've been isolated from a plague that's wiped out most of humanity. So in many ways, you would have to set up a situation like, are the PCs Green Berets? Are they archaeologists? Are they on a cruise ship? Are they on an airplane that goes into the air? And when they land, you know, all hell's broke loose, and they are like the ones who have some resources. You know, if they are on an airline, let's say, returning from somewhere, maybe the luggage and their skills, and they work together so that you could have a number of people in, say, one airplane, but when they land, they don't have access to their organization. So you would have to come up with they're special enough to have the ability to understand what's going on or to figure it out, to have those survival skills and maybe some equipment, but not have, like you mentioned, Rickard, like not having them have access to, you know, not being CIA spies and having access to like the NSA or something like that, right? Because then you could just, the PCs would just hang back and go, okay, I'm going to call the FBI and NSA and Homeland Security and MI5 or MI6 or whatever the case may be, you know, the Mossad. Like, I'm just going to make some phone calls and have them stop it, right? Yeah, so Foolish Kiwi says, this seems pretty dependent on the situation. Maybe the military begins a sudden panicked draft to deal with the threat. That's an idea too. Something maybe the media's and the military's been keeping something secret, but now they do like a draft where your average citizen gets pulled into this conflict. Yeah, very much so. Again, the movie Edge of Tomorrow, stupid name, great movie. Edge of Tomorrow, they were drafting, you know, there was an alien invasion and they were just drafting people probably by the thousands, the tens of thousands, because there weren't any military aged combat ready people left. So that's a thing too. Very old, very young would start fighting if most of the military was taken out in like the first waves of whatever it is, whether it's madness or aliens or some kind of mystical creature or something like that. Rickard says, I'm thinking without going into the pre-apocalypse. Oh, so you're saying like it's hard to do it without having the pre-apocalyptic event happening first, which I have to agree with you. Unless specifically the PCs are sent somewhere where there isn't any resource backup, like the deep ocean or someplace in the deep jungle or the Antarctic or something, like, you know, it would have to be someplace that can't be reached in the first place, and they know that they won't have anybody coming after a while. Kind of like 30 Days of Night, right? You're going someplace where you're going to get 30 days where it's just going to be all darkness, and you're not going to get an ice road trucker for, you know, 27 days or something. You would have to literally set up. And I mean, again, like the RPG Call of Cthulhu, you know, a session 0 is pretty much like, hey guys, listen, you won't be able to call for help. I know you're going to want to, and I know it makes sense that you may be able to, but there won't be help coming. It's just you guys solving the situation, right? And just accept it. It is a trope. It is as much of a trope as a well-balanced D&D party, right? I believe that just in a session 0, I think you would have to do it. I understand it kind of breaks reality a little bit, but every role-playing game breaks reality a little bit. That's why no one gets attacked when they're on the shitter in a role-playing game. It just, I mean, it makes sense that it would happen, but I mean, is it fair? Is it fun? Is it, you know, we pretty much are like, yeah, we ignore the toiletry issue and go with the action is that which is in front of us and which we can deal with. So it's a trope as well, right? So Rickard says, sure. Game Master's Toolbox says, I like the cruise ship idea because you can have different skill sets with little explanation. Yeah, I mean, it's the people traveling in a limited space. They arrive somewhere or go somewhere or get trapped out somewhere. Like, you know, a cruise ship in the Bermuda Triangle. Right. That's the idea where you take a cruise ship, you get a number of people who have different skill sets. There isn't help coming. You have a bunch of panicked people, which can help, you know, they hinder and help you, but help isn't on the way. So that could be a very, very much a thing. Rickard says, sure, you can do the isolation stories, but it becomes a very, very local horror. Well, that is horror in itself, right? Horror is about isolation and limited resources. Without it, it becomes more spies or agents or war. It moves away from horror stories. Isolation and limited resources is horror in itself, right? It's the in our modern day, not having our cell phones and not being able to call for help and not being able to travel and having our social norms removed is what horror is. You know, that is endemic in horror. So removing that gets us scared. When you can't call the authorities and all the neighbors are hanging out at the school because that's where everyone wants to go to escape danger, and you get that one neighbor that's like, oh, I get to be a psychopath now. You know what I mean? It's the well, we can't call the authorities. We're going to have to solve this on our own. And so I think that's where horror comes from. Most of the time in the pre-apocalypse settings and the horror settings, you find out the good and bad in people when society is removed. Do people become cannibals? Do they become torturers or rapists? Or do they lose their empathy for people, letting other people die that may or may not be their allies? Do you feed everyone? Do you shoot people in the back of the head that become sick because you can't take care of them anymore? Right? It's the pragmatist versus the empath, right? That kind of thing. We only have food for 5 people, but we have 10 people knocking at our doors and they need help. And there's women and children with them. Do you let them in or do you keep them out? Right? It's that kind of thing. You guys mentioned the Langoliers. The Langoliers, Deadman says, the Langoliers is a story by Stephen King about an airplane that lands after an event where everyone disappears. So he says, you know, Zal says, see Alien Isolation. Yeah. And the Langoliers is spoiler, the time travel-ish story where they land before, during, and after the idea that time is a specific location, and when time passes, it actually gets eaten up, and there's their pre-time and whatnot. It's kind of a weird thing to think about, but I love the idea. Game Master's Toolbox says World War Z had military going out with civilians, but they were looking for answers. Yeah, exactly. And remember, even in World War Z, while you follow along the story of them looking for answers, they didn't have very many resources to count on, per se. It was more like, you guys go out and discover something. We're going to stay back here and live. So you have that idea, right? Azala says, we've got 3 barbarians and a fighter. Let's go sneak around and figure out this royal drama. Yeah, it's silly. Game Master's Toolbox says, if you're going to break reality, make sure there's an excuse. You can have isolation in a city very easily. Try this. The monster is hunting down the PCs, but they are the only ones who can see it. Right, right. And that's exactly what I'm saying. Like, you would have to have, like, maybe they are infected with something where they can see the monster, or they have goggles that can see the monster, or they are from a bloodline, from an ancient curse, from the 1100s, that can see the monster, right? So maybe they created a device that allows them to track and see the device that no one else has. So in very many ways, horror is about, like, we're the only ones. Sure, everyone else is around, but it is in isolation, even if it is a social isolation. But yeah, Rickard says, I'm thinking if you want to do something like Shadow Out of Time or horrors on a global level, you might have something small happening in City X and later citywide, only to find they are connected. And that's a good thing. That's where I was bringing up the idea of a pre-apocalypse. Like, a major event happens in a city in the United States, and then another major, so the PCs uncover it, they stop it, they're like, oh good, we're done. And then a major event happens in Madagascar, and then a major event happens in India, and then a major event happens in Japan, and then major event happens in Mongolia, in Australia. So you're going around the world, or the PCs discover that it's happening around the world, and little by little society might start breaking down, and the PCs might be the only ones that have the answer. And again, the limitation could be dealing with politics. No one trusts your little small cadre of so-called heroes that know what's going on, of agents. We don't, China might be like, we don't trust you, United States, that, to help us solve this thing. We're going to do it on our own. And PCs might be like, you need to wake the F up. Like, we can help you with this. So even those things can happen, where the conflict of dealing with the horror is the fact that people don't like to listen. And they're pretty much self-absorbed, especially like politicians and most people in bureaucracies don't like to break the bureaucratic chain very much. And so that's another hindrance. Ricker says, Ozal says, or you could have the players be stuck in the sewers or in an abandoned building with the killer monster stalking them. And that's what I mentioned before, right? Like being stuck in an airport, or like you said, in a sewer, abandoned building, stuck in a cave system, stuck on an island, stuck in a cruise ship in a Bermuda Triangle, right? Stuck in an airplane that can't land, stuck on a train that's going out of control or something. So yeah, definitely. GMT Game Master Toolbox says, or not even the cops can save you. Terminators is a good example of this. Yeah, the thing that cannot be stopped, and every time you try to find something or people to help you stop it, they can't stop it at all. And you're just running from it. Very difficult to do. If it wasn't for a game like Call of Cthulhu, where you play a normal human, versus things that can absolutely kill you, that's another thing too. The PCs really have to be in a position where if they don't work together or find answers or team up, they really cannot defeat this thing by just punching it or shooting it, or punching or shooting it and solving the whole situation. Like, there might be waves of zombies, so killing 1 or 5 zombies might be easy. Killing 5,000 zombies might be very difficult. Rickard says, I suppose you could run something as an episodic campaign with new characters each chapter, so that the players start to see the big picture rather than the characters. I like that. I love that idea, especially if you have people or players that are used to always wanting to make a new character, or you could even have different characters with different capabilities. So one might be a bunch of people taking like a Greyhound bus across country. So they're all like just regular individuals, maybe down on their luck. And then you have another group that are ex-military. And then you could have highly trained assassins, and then you could have another group that are like living out in the woods, that are like preppers that expect this thing to happen. Like you could have a huge swath of different characters taking place in different places around the world, even, or even time periods. This is 2 years later, this is 3 months later, that we're going to flash back to the scientist before it got out, and you're going to play the scientist. Like, you could really do something with that. So I really love that idea. An episodic, the idea is to play through the storyline, but not play specific characters. So I really like that. And you could easily, that's a great way to have people come in and out of the storyline without having an explanation as to why they're going or not going, right? So you're going to play scientists this week. Next week, we're going to play passengers on an airline. And then next week, we're going to play people visiting a tropical island for vacation. And then next week, we're going to play workers on a cargo ship, right? Or submarine, a submarine captain and the crew, right? You could just keep flipping back and forth, even if you want to, if one group survives, and do something like that. I really like that. Rickard says, but it would be hard to have the characters be the same characters without making it feel forced, if that makes sense in context with the discussion about every man's special characters. And I think I kind of broke the cracker in what you're talking about. Rickard says, or find it hard, would love to get tips to make it feel less forced or not forced at all. I hope I gave some examples. I think you could probably do that. I don't think it's reserved for horror games, but I think you could really do that if you want to do a larger story. So an example would be like an alien invasion story. So you could have colonists on Mars, as well as people living in a space habitat around Earth, where you could also have people living on the moon, and then you have people living on Earth, and each group would be different PCs dealing with revealing information about what's going on, even though each PC group may not have the whole story. The players are getting the whole story by role playing each of those small groups. Cry 5, we can still use this thing where a small city or town is isolated, where, as mentioned earlier in the chat, where something goes viral and takes over our ability to communicate. Yeah, Azala says, or pretty much any Tomb Raider game. Right. Tomb Raider, going out into the jungles, going into the mountains, going into Arctic region, where help isn't readily available. You know, those people that claim to climb Mount Everest, there's not much you can do if you get stuck up there, right? It's the man versus the wild is still a thing. There are many places that you can't go to, deep in the desert, deep in, whatever have you. And then, of course, you can come up with ideas to isolate them, even if they are linked to greater resources, like going down in the deep ocean, but there are 6 ships ready to send supplies floating on the surface. And then you say, well, there's a storm coming. We're going to have to cut the cables, and you guys are on your own down in the deep ocean while we go sail 300 miles away to avoid this storm, right? And we'll be back in 2 days. So now you're deep in the ocean. There's a 2-day gap, and then something happens out in the water, and a big kraken comes by or something like that. So yeah, horror is just one of those things that session 0, you're just going to have to explain, even out of character, and say, hey guys, listen, we're going to run a horror game. Understand that you're going to be put in situations where where your time, your energy, and your resources are limited. Your communication, your link to society, social isolation. Hey, people aren't going to believe you. And I know it sounds kind of like, do you really want to know before the game even starts that you can't trust anyone? Yeah, it feels a little bit odd to be like, the rule of the world is you can't, the cops will not trust you, but sometimes doing the out of game, breaking the immersion explanation sometimes works better than frustrating player characters who are trying to live in a realistic world. Why can't I call the cops? Why can't I call SWAT? Why can't I call in backup because I'm ex-military, right? Or I'm a special agent with the NSA or MI6 or whatever, the Mossad or whatever other special agencies around the world, for the game master to constantly keep telling them they don't come, they don't send, they don't believe you, they don't send supplies, they don't send reinforcements. When they try to send reinforcements, the helicopter gets shot down. The GPS is lost. They are attacked by rocket launchers and they don't come in enough time. They're pinned down by the enemy. They are, and once you get through excuse 5, 6, 7, some players might just get frustrated and throw their hands up like, well, you're just trying to kill my character. You're just trying to nerf what we're trying to do. We're stuck. There's nothing we can do. And so I just preempting all that, I would rather just be told, this is the game we're playing, Call of Cthulhu. The minute you open up a Call of Cthulhu book, everyone should pretty much be like, okay, we're probably going to die. Let's play, right? We're going to go mad. Let's play. So that's the thing we really didn't discuss, is the madness part of it. Yes, looking Cthulhu in the eye will turn you insane, but also the idea that there is the horrors out there will drive you insane. Whether it is watching people die by the tens or hundreds or thousands, watching people perform evil or heinous acts when society starts to fall apart. The one a-hole that's in the group that throws the pregnant woman and her children out on her ass because he's like, well, if we let them in, we're gonna have to let everybody in, right? And fighting against that, or being forced to do things you don't want to do. Again, like putting a bullet in the back of the head of somebody who happens to have the flu, right? And you don't want to get sick, or the person that breaks their leg or has internal injuries, and you have to put them down because we don't have a way to save them, but we can't drag them with us to run away from this monster or something. Or we only have 3 antidotes, but there's 5 of us. Who takes the antidote? And being driven, the psychological horror, the PTSD, the shell shock, the battle fatigue of dealing with that. And so, it's, and including that in the game, I think is another part that makes Call of Cthulhu, the role-playing game, and horror in general, what makes things horrible. If everyone is a superhuman, right? They're never affected by anything that they see or encounter or the hard choices they make, then they're pretty much like special agents. They're not really fighting against horrors per se, but if they are individuals who are regular human beings that don't want to lose their humanity, then I think you start really embracing the horror aspect of what horror is. Rickard Johansson says, just play worse and worse dark ambience, the more madness the party accumulates. Yeah. And of course, whatever mechanic you use, whether you start accumulating points or die rolls or something where the madness starts to creep in, I think is a thing. Foolish Kiwi. So what you're saying, horror isn't for whiners. Hell yeah, it isn't. It isn't. People who are into like Call of Cthulhu are diehards, and some people just do not like playing a character who has to fight mental afflictions. That's not a very hey, I'm a gun-toting hero and I'm never stressed by anything kind of thing. Torchwood, a TV series derived from Doctor Who about a man who couldn't die, and there was a whole horror season where death was prevented and people were getting in situations where they should have died but didn't. That was pretty horrible to witness as well. So that those kind of things could happen. People turning into zombies and having to shoot them is a horrible thing. I know this is the future, but even the first Alien movie, everyone's sitting around eating dinner, someone starts choking. they fall down on the table and the alien thing, does the chest bursting thing, right? And everyone is horrified by that. So it's not necessarily the physical confrontation of fighting the horror, but also dealing with the social ramifications of it. How much do you start whittling away at your own morality and your own rules of living in a society before you're not human anymore, right? How many times do you torture an innocent person trying to find out why they're going after you, or torturing people in general, right? That's not a skill people normally have till you start losing your own humanity, and you're no longer you no longer recognize yourself. So Azala says there's an episode of The Librarians where they kept respawning every time they died over and over and over again. And that's a horrible thing too, to deal with, like reliving the same day over and over again, suffering through knowing that you and people that you either respect or love are suffering through the same horrors over and over again until you stop it. Those are horrible things too. So mental affliction is a big part of horror, and it's pretty a horrible thing. So yeah, embracing that. So we've hit the hour mark, a little over, of course, as usual. We're going to sign out now. Thank you guys for joining me. Game Master's Toolbox, again, Azala, everybody, Vince, Deadman. I hope I was able to give some slight insights, because I know I got the impression you were like, things aren't going to work out right. And I agree, because in reality, horror isn't really a thing that would happen naturally. It would have to be a set of circumstances that causes it. And so just coming up with those circumstances, setting it up for people. Yeah, that's all. So anyway, guys, thank you very much for joining me. I'm DBJ. This is RPG with DBJ. Tomorrow we go into cyberpunk and low Earth orbit, or near Earth orbit. And yeah, that's going to be fun. We're going to go into like cyberpunk, that we're going to go through Earth and Earth orbit. Near future, we're going to do our solar system, close future. I don't know what you would call that. I do understand that the K1, K2 thing about different societies. We're going to make it a little bit smaller than that, and then go out from our solar system, maybe go out to our galaxy and things like that. And then, of course, we're advancing technology. And then what kind of stories, like why would we want to tell those stories, especially if you're a person who swears by medieval, hey, I like swords and sorcery. I don't like technology. Why would I want to do that? And dealing with it as a game master as well. So guys, everyone, have a good one. I will see you later.